It wasn't until the laughter died down that I realized I'd gone too far. The look on Derek's face, hurt, humiliated, was one I hadn't seen in years. But the worst part wasn't his reaction. It was the way his brother Cole leaned back in his chair, smirking like he'd been waiting for me to make that mistake. The family dinner had started out fine. Derek's parents were in their usual good spirits, chattering about their garden and the neighbors. I'd been seated next to Derek, as always, while his younger brother, Cole, took the chair across from me. It had been a while since I'd seen Cole. He lived a few hours away and rarely visited, though whenever he did, he always brought a certain energy with him. There was something magnetic about him, his casual confidence, the way he carried himself. It was hard not to notice the sharp contrast between him and Derek, even if I didn't want to admit it. Dinner conversation drifted into harmless topics: work, home projects, and upcoming birthdays. Derek mentioned how we'd been dealing with a broken dishwasher for weeks, his tone light but exasperated. "I just haven't had time to get around to it," he said, shrugging. That's when I said it. The joke. The one that cracked the foundation beneath us. "Well, you're not exactly handy, Derek," I said, smirking as I reached for my wine glass. "Let's face it, you'd probably call someone to change a light bulb if you could." The table erupted into laughter, even Derek's mom chuckling as she dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. But when I glanced at Derek, the smile on my face froze. He wasn't laughing. Derek's face turned crimson. His lips pressed into a tight line as he stabbed at his food. For a second, I felt a pang of guilt. It wasn't like me to tease him in front of others, but the wine had loosened my tongue, and the joke had slipped out before I could stop it. But it wasn't just Derek's reaction that caught my attention. It was Cole's. He was leaning back in his chair, his arms crossed, a slow, knowing smirk spreading across his face. His eyes flicked between Derek and me like he was watching a scene from a movie he'd seen play out before. "Come on, Elise," Cole said, his voice smooth, teasing. "You've been with Derek long enough to know he's not exactly Mr. Fix-It. Some of us were born to be brains, not brawn." It was meant to ease the tension, I think, but the way he said it, the way his eyes lingered on me as he spoke, made my skin prickle. The conversation moved on, but Derek stayed quiet for the rest of the meal. I tried to catch his eye, to silently apologize, but he wouldn't look at me. When dinner ended, Derek retreated to the living room with his dad while Cole stayed behind to help clear the table. I could feel his presence as he moved around the kitchen, his casual confidence making the air feel heavier. "You really hit a nerve, you know," Cole said, breaking the silence. I glanced up from the sink. Startled. "What are you talking about?" He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his gaze steady. "Derek, he doesn't like being called out, especially not in front of Mom and Dad." I frowned, setting down the plate I was rinsing. "It was just a joke." "Sure," Cole said, his lips curling into that same smirk he'd had at the table. "But jokes like that, they stick, especially when they come from someone like you." "Someone like me?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. He shrugged, pushing off the counter and moving closer. "Come on, Elise. You know Derek idolizes you. He's always trying to live up to whatever impossible standard he thinks you've set for him. A comment like that, it hits where it hurts." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell him he was reading too much into it, but the words didn't come. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Derek's insecurity about his usefulness had always been a sore spot, and I'd poked at it without thinking. "You should go talk to him," Cole said, his tone softer now, "before it turns into something bigger." "Yeah," I muttered, grabbing a dish towel and drying my hands. "I'll do that." As I turned to leave, I felt Cole's gaze linger on me, a heat in his eyes that made my stomach twist. When I found Derek in the living room, he was slouched on the couch, his arms crossed tightly over his chest as he stared at the TV. His dad was talking, but Derek wasn't listening, his jaw clenched and his eyes distant. "Hey," I said softly, sitting down beside him. He barely glanced at me. "Hey." I leaned in closer, lowering my voice so his dad couldn't hear. "About earlier, I didn't mean to embarrass you." He didn't respond, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "Derek," I tried again, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm sorry, okay? It was just a joke. I didn't think." "That's the problem, Elise," he said finally, his voice low but sharp. "You didn't think." His words stung, but I didn't push back. I knew I'd hurt him, and pushing wouldn't fix it. So I just nodded, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. I'll make it up to you, okay? Derek sighed, finally looking at me, though his eyes were still clouded with hurt. I'm going to bed, he muttered, standing abruptly. It's been a long day. I watched him walk away, the guilt twisting tighter in my chest. Back in the kitchen, Cole was finishing up the dishes. He glanced at me as I walked in, raising an eyebrow. How'd it go? He's upset? I said, grabbing a glass of wine from the counter and taking a long sip. I think I really hurt him. Cole didn't say anything at first, just watched me as I leaned against the counter, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. He'll get over it, he said finally, his voice low. Derek's always been good at pretending things don't bother him, even when they do. There was something in the way he said it, something almost smug. I looked up at him, meeting his gaze, and for a moment, the air between us felt charged. Don't look so guilty, Elise, he said, his lips curling into that familiar smirk. You're human. You've got needs. Sometimes those needs don't line up with what you've got. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Because for the first time, I realized Cole wasn't just being his usual cocky self. He was testing me. And I didn't know if I wanted him to stop. When Derek went to bed, I thought the night was over. I had no idea it was just beginning, and that Cole was about to cross a line I never expected, or maybe even wanted him to. The house had quieted down after dinner. Derek was in the bedroom with the door closed, his presence as distant as the tension lingering between us. His parents had retired to their guest room upstairs, leaving just me and Cole. I poured myself another glass of wine and sat in the living room, staring at the flickering TV screen, but not really watching. My mind replayed the dinner over and over. The look on Derek's face when I made the joke. The way Cole had smirked at me like he'd been waiting for something to crack. The guilt was heavy, but so was the frustration. Derek had always been sensitive about certain things. His insecurities about not being manly enough, about not being able to take charge the way his younger brother could. And maybe that sensitivity wasn't entirely his fault, but I was tired of tiptoeing around it. I didn't notice Cole walk in until he was standing beside me, a beer in one hand and his other casually resting in his pocket. You're still up? He asked, his voice low but edged with amusement. I shrugged, swirling the wine in my glass. Couldn't sleep, he nodded, taking the chair across from me and sitting with that same easy confidence he always carried. Derek turned in early, huh? Yeah, I said, taking another sip. Cole watched me for a moment, his gaze steady, thoughtful. You know, he said, leaning back in his chair, Derek's always been like that. Runs off to brood when things get tough. I frowned, setting my glass down on the coffee table. He's not brooding. Cole raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching into a half smile. If you say so. There was a beat of silence, the only sound coming from the low hum of the TV. I shifted uncomfortably under Cole's gaze, the intensity of it making my skin prickle. Look, I said, breaking the quiet, I know I shouldn't have said what I said at dinner. It was a stupid joke, and I didn't mean to hurt him. Didn't you, though? Cole asked, his voice soft but pointed. I blinked, startled. What's that supposed to mean? He shrugged, taking a slow sip of his beer. Just saying. Sometimes people don't say things like that unless there's some truth behind it. I opened my mouth to argue but stopped myself, because deep down, I knew Cole wasn't entirely wrong. I hadn't meant to hurt Derek, but there was a part of me that was frustrated with him, that wished he could be more. I didn't even know. More confident, more assertive, more like. I stopped that thought before it could fully form, but Cole must have seen it in my face. You don't have to pretend with me, Elise, he said, his voice lower now. I see the way you look at him, the way you look at me. My breath caught in my throat. Cole, don't. I'm just being honest, he said, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. You're not happy. Anyone can see that. The air between us felt charged, heavier with every passing second. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I was happy, that he didn't know what he was talking about. But the words wouldn't come. Cole tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle he was trying to solve. You know, he said, his voice soft but laced with something dangerous, it doesn't have to be this way. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling. I'm saying, he said, leaning back in his chair, you deserve better. Someone who sees you, who knows what you need, someone who can handle you. My heart was pounding now, my hands gripping the edge of the couch cushion. Cole, stop. Why? He asked, his gaze locked on mine. Because you're scared I'm right? Or because you're scared of what might happen if you admit it? I'm married to your brother, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. And? He said, his tone calm, almost casual. Does he make you happy, Elise? Really happy? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him to stop, but the truth was staring me in the face. Cole stood, moving to sit on the couch beside me. He was close now, too close, his presence overwhelming. Cole, I said, my voice trembling, this isn't right. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair away from my face, his fingers lingering just a little too long. You don't really believe that, he murmured. My breath hitched as his hand moved to my cheek, his thumb brushing against my skin. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, but it sent a shiver down my spine. This isn't about Derek, he said softly. This is about you. What you want, what you need. For a moment, I let myself lean into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut as his hand moved to the back of my neck. His lips were so close, I could feel his breath against my skin, and every rational thought in my mind was screaming at me to stop. But I didn't. When his lips brushed against mine, it was tentative, almost hesitant, as if he was giving me one last chance to pull away. But instead, I leaned in, my hands finding their way to his chest, his shirt warm and soft beneath my fingers. The kiss deepened, and all the guilt, all the frustration, melted away in the heat of the moment. Cole's hands were firm but gentle, his touch igniting something in me I hadn't felt in years. Tell me to stop, he murmured against my lips, his voice thick with restraint. I couldn't. Cole, I whispered, my fingers tangling in his hair. That was all the permission he needed. I told myself it was just one moment, one kiss, one bad decision. But when Cole pulled me closer, his breath hot against my neck, I knew I wasn't going to stop. Not this time. The kiss deepened, and everything else disappeared. The guilt, the fear, the reality of Derek asleep just down the hall. Cole's hands moved with confidence, sliding down my sides, his touch igniting something inside me I hadn't felt in years. I knew it was wrong. I knew I should have stopped it the moment his lips touched mine. But there was something about him, his intensity, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the world, that made it impossible to pull away. You're incredible, Cole murmured, his voice rough as his lips trailed down my jawline. Cole, I whispered, my hands gripping his shoulders. We can't. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look me in the eye. Then tell me to stop, he said, his voice low, his eyes dark with want. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because the truth was, I didn't want him to stop. He didn't wait for me to respond. His lips found mine again, more insistent this time, his hands sliding under the hem of my shirt. His touch was firm, his fingers warm against my skin, and I couldn't hold back the soft gasp that escaped my lips. God, Elise, he murmured, his voice thick with restraint. You have no idea how long I've wanted this. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt my resolve crumble completely. My hands moved instinctively, slipping under his shirt, my fingers trailing over the hard lines of his chest. Tell me you don't feel it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Tell me you don't want this as much as I do. I can't, I admitted, my voice trembling. The air between us was electric, the tension unbearable as Cole pulled me closer, his lips moving down to my neck. I tilted my head back, my breath hitching as his teeth grazed my skin, sending sparks racing through my body. My mind screamed at me to stop, to think about Derek, about the consequences, but my body refused to listen. I'd been starved for this kind of attention, this kind of connection, for so long that it felt like drowning and finally breaking the surface. Cole's hands moved with purpose, sliding under my shirt and lifting it over my head. His lips found my collarbone, then lower, his movements confident but unhurried, as if he was savoring every moment. You're perfect, he whispered, his voice raw. I felt exposed, vulnerable, but in a way that made my heart race with excitement. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew how dangerous this was. Derek was just down the hall, asleep, completely unaware of what was happening in his own home. The thought should have stopped me, but instead, it only added to the rush. Cole lifted me effortlessly, carrying me to the couch and laying me down gently. His weight pressed against me, grounding me, as his lips found mine again. "Tell me this isn't what you've been wanting," he said, his breath hot against my ear. I couldn't lie to him. Not now. "It is," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Time seemed to blur after that. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word felt electric, like I was waking up after years of being asleep. Cole moved with a confidence that left me breathless, his hands exploring every inch of me, like he was memorizing the shape of my body. For the first time in so long, I wasn't thinking about responsibilities or appearances or what was expected of me. I was just alive. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the couch, the room quiet, except for the sound of our breathing. Cole's arm was draped over my waist, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my skin. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice gentle. I nodded, though my chest felt tight with a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. "Yeah," I said, my voice barely audible. He tilted my chin up, his eyes searching mine. "I don't regret it," he said firmly. I wanted to tell him I didn't either, but the words caught in my throat. Because as much as I wanted to cling to the warmth of his touch, the weight of what we'd just done was already settling in. Somewhere down the hall, I heard the faint creak of a floorboard. My heart stopped, my breath catching in my throat. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Cole sat up slightly, his body tense as he listened. The house was silent again, but the sense of unease lingered. "It's probably nothing," he said quietly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. But as I lay there, my body still pressed against his, a gnawing feeling of dread began to creep in. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't going to stay a secret for long. I thought we'd gotten away with it. But the moment Derek showed me the photo, I knew he hadn't just discovered the truth. He'd been planning his revenge from the second he saw us. The next morning, the house felt different. The air was heavy, the silence too loud, and every little sound made me jump. Derek had already left for work by the time I woke up, his side of the bed cold and undisturbed, which wasn't unusual. But something about it felt off. Cole was gone too. He'd left before dawn, slipping out quietly to avoid the awkwardness of a morning after. The only evidence of what had happened between us was the faint scent of his cologne lingering on the couch cushions. I spent the day trying to push the guilt aside, telling myself it was a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Derek's face. The way he'd looked at me the night before, hurt and distant, and the guilt twisted tighter. Derek came home late that evening, his expression calm but unreadable. He kissed me on the cheek, the gesture mechanical, and muttered something about having a long day. We ate dinner in near silence, the clinking of forks on plates the only sound between us. I tried to start a conversation, asking about his day, but he responded with short, clipped answers, his eyes fixed on his food. By the time we were done, I couldn't take it anymore. "Derek," I said, my voice trembling. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "What? Are you okay?" He tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Why wouldn't I be?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, he stood, picking up his plate and taking it to the sink. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he was buying time to decide what to say next. When he finally turned back to me, his eyes were colder than I'd ever seen them. "You tell me, Elise," he said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut. "Should I be okay?" My stomach twisted painfully. "Derek, what's going on?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, unlocking it with a swipe of his thumb. He didn't say a word, as he set it on the table in front of me, the screen facing up. And then I saw it. The photo was blurry but unmistakable. Me and Cole, tangled together on the couch, his arms wrapped around me, my face pressed against his chest, my breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear the words Derek said next. "How long?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. "Derek," I whispered, tears already stinging my eyes. "I can explain." "I don't want your excuses," he snapped, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "I want the truth. How long?" "It was just once," I said quickly, my voice trembling. "It was a mistake, Derek, I swear." "A mistake," he repeated, his eyes narrowing. A mistake is forgetting to turn off the stove. This is betrayal. I tried to stand to move closer to him, but the look he gave me stopped me in my tracks. You humiliated me, Elise, he said, his voice deadly quiet. In my own home, with my brother. I didn't mean for it to happen, I said desperately. I wasn't thinking. You weren't thinking, Matt, he repeated, his lips curling into a bitter smile. That's your excuse? You weren't thinking? I broke then, the tears spilling over as I buried my face in my hands. I'm sorry, Derek. I'm so sorry. For a moment he said nothing, just watched me with that same cold, calculating expression. And then he laughed, a short, humorless sound that made my chest ache. Sorry doesn't cut it, Elise, he said, his voice harder now. You didn't just ruin our marriage. You destroyed this family. I looked up at him, my vision blurred with tears. Please, Derek, I begged. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. We can... He held up a hand, silencing me. There's no we anymore, he said firmly. You made sure of that. The rest of the evening was a blur. Derek didn't yell, didn't scream. He didn't need to. His words cut deeper than any outburst ever could, and by the time he left the room, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I spent the night on the couch staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with everything I'd done wrong. But the worst part wasn't Derek's reaction. It was knowing that this was only the beginning. The next morning I woke to the sound of Derek's voice coming from the kitchen. I sat up, my heart pounding as I realized he wasn't alone. When I walked in, Derek was sitting at the table with his parents. His father's face was grim, his mother's eyes red and swollen, like she'd been crying. They all looked up when I entered, and the weight of their judgment hit me like a brick. What's going on? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Derek didn't answer. Instead, he slid his phone across the table, the photo of me and Cole still displayed on the screen. You tell them, he said, his voice ice cold. The room spun as I stood there, my hands trembling, my chest tight with panic. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Derek's father was the first to speak, his voice heavy with disappointment. Elise, how could you? No, Derek cut in, his voice sharp. No excuses, no lies, you tell them the truth, or I will. The words spilled out before I could stop them, my voice breaking as I tried to explain. But there was no explanation that could make it better. No justification that could undo what I'd done. By the time I finished, Derek's mother was sobbing, her face buried in her hands. His father just shook his head, his expression one of utter disgust. You're unbelievable, Derek said, his voice low but filled with venom. I hope it was worth it, Elise, because you've destroyed everything. As I stood there, my world crumbling around me, I realized he was right. There was no going back. Derek didn't just want to punish me, he wanted to burn everything to the ground. And as I sat across from Cole, watching him take the brunt of Derek's fury, I realized how much worse this was going to get. By the time Derek called Cole later that day, I knew it wasn't going to be a civil conversation. I'd heard him pacing in the bedroom, his voice sharp and clipped as he demanded Cole come over. Derek didn't even try to mask his fury, his words growing colder and angrier with every minute. Tonight, I heard him say before hanging up. The pit in my stomach grew heavier. I wanted to beg him to stop, to not drag Cole into this, but I knew better. Derek wasn't interested in calming down. He wanted retribution, and he wasn't going to stop until he got it. Cole arrived just after sunset, his familiar confidence replaced by a tension I'd never seen in him before. He didn't greet me as he walked into the living room, his jaw tight, his eyes flicking briefly toward me before landing on Derek, who stood near the window with his arms crossed. So, Cole said, breaking the silence, what's this about? You know damn well what this is about, Derek snapped, his voice low and sharp. Cole glanced at me again, his expression unreadable, before turning back to Derek. Look, Don't, Derek cut him off, stepping closer. Don't you dare try to explain this away. You think I don't know what happened? You think I don't have proof? For a moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room was suffocating, the air so thick it felt like I couldn't breathe. I'm sorry, Cole said finally, his voice steady but quieter than usual. I didn't mean for it to happen. Derek laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. You didn't mean for it to happen? That's your excuse? You seduced my wife in my own home, and now you're going to stand there and pretend it was some kind of accident? I'm not pretending anything, Cole said, his tone firmer now. I take full responsibility. But this isn't just on me, Derek. Derek's eyes darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. Oh, don't worry, he said coldly. Elise isn't getting off the hook either. But you're my brother, my family, and you betrayed me. Derek, please, I said, stepping forward, my voice trembling. This isn't helping. Don't, Derek snapped, turning on me. You don't get to play peacemaker, Elise. You don't get to act like you're above this when you're the one who started it. His words hit me like a slap, and I shrank back, my chest tightening with guilt and shame. Cole stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. If you want to be angry at me. I'll take it, but don't drag her through this just to make yourself feel better. Derek's eyes narrowed. Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you? To swoop in and play the hero, to make her think you're the better man. But here's the thing, Cole, you're not. You're just a selfish, arrogant bastard who's been taking what isn't his since the day you were born. The words hung in the air, cutting deeper than any punch could have. Cole's jaw tightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides, but he didn't lash out. I didn't come here to fight, he said quietly. I came here to fix this. Fix this? Derek repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. You can't fix this, Cole. You can't undo what you've done. You can't fix her. He shot me a cold glance, his words like daggers. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I had no right to cry, not now. Not after everything I'd done. The argument escalated from there, Derek's voice growing louder, angrier, while Cole remained calm, his words measured but firm. You think I wanted this to happen? Cole asked, his voice sharp. You think I planned this? I don't care what you wanted, Derek shot back. What I care about is that you crossed a line, Cole. A line you can't come back from. And what about Elise? Cole countered, his gaze flicking toward me. What about the fact that she's been miserable for years? What about the fact that you've been so busy controlling everything around you that you didn't even see her slipping away? Derek's face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he was going to hit him. But instead, he stepped back, his hands trembling with barely contained rage. Get out, Derek said finally, his voice low and cold. What? Cole asked, his voice quiet. You heard me, Derek said, his eyes blazing. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. You're not my brother anymore. Cole hesitated, his jaw tightening as he looked between me and Derek. Derek, don't do this, he said, his voice softer now. It's already done, Derek said, his tone final. You made your choice, Cole. Now live with it. For a moment, Cole didn't move. He just stood there, his shoulders tense, his expression a mix of anger and sadness. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door, the sound of it slamming shut, echoing through the house. The silence that followed was unbearable. Derek didn't look at me, didn't say a word as he turned and walked back to the bedroom, leaving me standing there, alone and broken. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, my chest tight with guilt and regret. I'd thought the worst was over, but it was only just beginning. Because Derek wasn't just cutting ties with Cole, he was cutting ties with me too. And I had no idea how to stop it. Derek wasn't yelling anymore. He wasn't pacing or making threats. He was calm, quiet, methodical. And somehow, that was worse. It was the silence that told me this was the end, and no amount of apologies could change that. The house felt impossibly quiet after Cole left. The sound of the door slamming still echoed in my ears, and I couldn't bring myself to move from the couch. My chest felt tight, my stomach twisted in knots. Derek had gone to the bedroom without another word, leaving me alone with my thoughts, my guilt, and the sharp realization that I had burned everything to the ground. I sat there for hours, staring at the blank TV screen, too afraid to move, too afraid to face Derek and the wreckage of what was left of our marriage. It wasn't until close to midnight that I finally worked up the courage to go to him. I opened the bedroom door slowly, half expecting to find him already asleep. But he wasn't. Derek was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to me, his shoulders slumped. His phone sat on the nightstand, and I could see the faint glow of a message notification. Derek, I said softly, stepping into the room. He didn't respond. I took a tentative step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Please, say something. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost resigned. There's nothing left to say. His words hit me harder than I expected, and I felt tears sting my eyes again. Derek, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean much right now, but Stop, he said, cutting me off. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable but his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. Anger, disappointment, hurt. I don't want to hear it. Derek, please, I said, my voice trembling. We can fix this. We can try. He stood abruptly, the sudden movement startling me. Fix this? He repeated, his voice cold. How do you fix something like this, Elise? How do you come back from this? I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Because I didn't have an answer. Derek began pacing the room, his hands on his hips, his head bowed like he was trying to collect his thoughts. You didn't just betray me, he said finally, his voice low but steady. You betrayed us. Everything we've built, and with my own brother Elise, my own brother. I know, I whispered, my voice breaking, and I hate myself for it, but I didn't mean for this to happen, Derek. I wasn't thinking. That's the problem, isn't it? He said, stopping to face me. You weren't thinking. About me, about us, about what this would do to our family. The silence that followed was deafening. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap between us, but the weight of his words crushed me. Finally, Derek sighed, running a hand through his hair. I can't do this anymore, Elise. My heart sank. What are you saying? I'm saying I need space, he said, his voice quieter now. I can't look at you right now. I can't look at this house, this life we've built. Not after what you've done. Derek, please, I begged, stepping closer to him. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. I'm not the one who threw it away, he said sharply, his eyes flashing with anger. He grabbed a small duffel bag from the closet and began tossing clothes into it, his movements quick and deliberate. Where are you going? I asked, my voice trembling. To my parents, he said without looking at me. They deserve to know what's going on. They deserve the truth. And what about me? I asked, tears streaming down my face now. Derek paused, his hand gripping the zipper of the bag. That's up to you, he said finally. Figure out what you want, Elise. Figure out what you're willing to live with. When he left, the sound of the front door closing behind him felt like a final blow. I stood in the middle of the bedroom, my chest heaving, my hands shaking, as the reality of what had just happened sank in. Derek was gone. Cole was gone. And I was left alone with nothing but the ruins of what I'd destroyed. The next few days passed in a blur. Derek didn't call, didn't text, and I didn't dare reach out to him. I spent most of my time sitting in the living room, staring at the empty space where Cole had kissed me, where everything had started to unravel. I thought about calling Cole, about asking him why he'd left so easily, why he hadn't fought for me, for us. But every time I picked up the phone, I froze, because I wasn't even sure I wanted him to answer. When Derek finally called, it was almost a week later. I've spoken to my parents, he said, his voice flat. They know everything. My stomach twisted painfully. Derek, I've also spoken to a lawyer, he said, cutting me off. I'm not filing for divorce, not yet, but I want a separation. I need time to figure out what I want. The line went quiet for a moment before he added, You should use the time to figure out what you want too. After the call, I sat in silence, his words echoing in my mind. Figure out what you want. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I could fix things with Derek, if I even deserved to try. I didn't know if there was a future with Cole, or if what we'd shared had been nothing more than a fleeting moment of weakness. What I did know was that I couldn't keep living like this, trapped by my mistakes, weighed down by guilt. That night I packed a small suitcase. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I needed to leave, to get some distance, to clear my head. As I stood in the doorway, the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me, I took a deep breath and stepped outside. It wasn't freedom, not yet. But it was a start.